Hi class. Today we're going to be talking about justice as fairness. This was an idea that was developed by a guy by the name of John Rawls from Harvard and very likely had a very profound effect on Obama. He was writing in the 60s and it's really the foundation of what we think of as American liberalism. It's quite an impressive idea. John Rawls begins with the notion that nature is unfair. And of course we'll recognize that it is. Nature is unfair. In fact, he describes this as a natural lottery. Nobody gets what they deserve, they just get what they get. Nobody asked to be born in Wilkinsburg, nobody asked to be born in Fox Chapel, nobody asked to have rich parents, nobody asked to have poor parents, no one asked to be healthy, no one asked to be sickly. Nobody gets what they deserve, they just get what they get. Nature is an absolute lottery. Nature is unfair, and again, that's called the natural lottery. Now, because nature is unfair, one of the obligations of society, civil society, is to make up for the unfairness of nature. So one of the ideas that Rawls recognizes, and I'm sure that you will recognize it too, is that equal rights is not fair rights. So equal is not fair. Sometimes people need things and they don't have them. Some people don't have things and so they don't need them. So one of the great examples that I use to describe this is called the Band-Aid problem. If you have a bunch of kids and you're in a soccer team, let's say, and one of the children falls down and gets a cut, and you give them a very fancy Band-Aid. Now all of the other kids are going to say, I want a Band-Aid too, I want a Band-Aid too. But even though that would be equal to give every kid a Band-Aid, it would have nothing to do with fairness because only the child that got hurt needs the Band-Aid. So that's called the Band-Aid problem. One of the things that Rawls is most famous for is what he calls the veil of ignorance. I'll write this down. Veil of ignorance. And he comes up with this idea of the veil of ignorance to give us a notion of what it would be like if we were policymakers and we had no idea what our own unique needs were. So I want you to imagine that today somehow magically got $1 billion. The Martians came over the earth and gave you $1 billion today. However, next week you would be somebody entirely different and you would have no idea where that $1 billion went. You wouldn't even remember even receiving that $1 billion. Now, that's the veil of ignorance. Here it is, you have this $1 billion and your goal is to spend that $1 billion in the way that's most likely to help you when you come out from behind the veil of ignorance. So where would you spend it? Would you give that money to rich people or poor people? Sick people or healthy people? Now remember, what is your biggest fear? You're behind the veil of ignorance. Are you going to be afraid of coming out rich as Donald Trump or rich as Oprah Winfrey? Is that your fear? Or is your fear that you're going to come out from behind the veil of ignorance poor? Are you afraid that you're going to come out from behind the veil of ignorance healthy and strong? Or are you afraid you're going to come out from behind the veil of ignorance sickly and weak? So most of us would say, if I have to spend that $1 billion, I'm going to spend it on creating the best safety net for myself if I come out from behind this veil of ignorance very, very needy. So think about this when you go into a voting booth. When you go into a voting booth, you have no idea what tomorrow's going to be like. So are you going to vote to help the wealthy? In other words, the people who maybe you're wealthy today, but if you're not sure you're going to be wealthy, are you going to vote to help the wealthy or are you going to vote to help the poor and things turn out badly for you? So what Rawls is looking at is he's saying the way we should develop public policy is always to help the least well off first. Always help those who are the greatest in need before those who have less need. And this is also a basic principle of Catholic social teaching. It's called the preferential option for the poor. And all that means is you help the worst off first. WAF, help the worst off first. And once you understand helping the worst off first, you'll understand what justice as fairness is. It means don't give everybody equal rights, but give people the rights according to what they actually need. And this is what a fair tax system would be. You tax the most wealthy at the highest rates and the least wealthy at the lowest rates. So let me give you a little puzzle. Let's just say I have 20 students and I'm given $40. Okay? 20 students, $40. And dinner costs $4 a meal. So that means I can only give 10 students a dinner. And 10 students will go without eating. How do I choose? Do I give every student $2? If I do that, nobody eats. So that wouldn't work, even though that's equal. So equal distribution would be a very bad idea. Again, 20 students, $40. If I split it equally, every student gets $2 and absolutely no one eats dinner. So that's not a very good way to distribute it. So I'm going to have to give 10 people food and let 10 people not eat. How in the world do I choose? How do I choose according to justice as fairness rather than equal distribution? Well, I would ask, who's hungry? Who just ate? Once I find out that a few people were very hungry, I'd say, okay, you might get to eat. I'd ask, who's sick and really needs to eat, or they're going to have some sort of fit or a problem, diabetic coma. I would definitely give those people food. And so I would always start with those who were the least needy first, with the least needy last and most needy first. WAF, worst off first. Once you understand who's the worst off, that's who you help first. The preferential option for the poor, as Catholic social teachings call it. So this is the idea of the veil of ignorance. If you don't know who you are and you create a policy, you should make that policy in order to help you, if you come out from behind that veil of ignorance, in the greatest need. Now, one of the things that Rawls came up with is something that he calls the Maxi-Min principle. Maxi-Min principle. And all that means is do what's going to create the least bad, worst possible outcome. Think how funny that is. Least bad, worst possible outcome. And now why that's important, the idea of the least bad, worst possible outcome, is you want to make sure that your policy doesn't really hurt anyone tremendously, even if it doesn't help anyone as best as it possibly can. So the concern then is to help those the most worst off first, and to make sure that they're getting help would be if they didn't get helped at all, they could starve to death and die. That'd be the worst possible outcome. So the least bad, worst possible outcome always starts with helping the most badly off, the worst off first, and helping the best off last. And then no matter how it goes, at least those who are starving won't starve, even if those who are rich don't get any more. So let me erase this for a second, and I'll give you an interesting idea that he comes up with. He brings up something, and you're going to see your own tax policy and the health insurance, the Affordable Care Act, and all of that in this idea. He says, let's separate people into a group of people. At the very top, we have what he calls the maxi-max, the richest of the rich. Those are the people like Trump and Oprah. They're billionaires. Then we have the mini-max. These are just the really rich people. So these are billionaires. These are millionaires. Mini-max. They're the least wealthy of the richest people. These are the most wealthy of the richest people. Then you have here the midi-mid. That's us. Well, actually, if we're lucky, that's us. This is the middle class. These are the people making less than $200,000 a year. And you notice those numbers were very big when Biden's talking about taxes and when Obama's talking about taxes. This is the group between 200,000, 400 at the max. These are the group he says we're not going to tax them very much. Of course, it didn't really work out that way with the Affordable Care Act, and you'll see in a minute. Then you have this group called the Maxi-Min. Remember our Maxi-Min principle? These are the richest of the poor. They have the most of the poor. And this is the mini-min. And the mini-min are the people living on the street and starving to death. So when you walk around Pittsburgh and you see people living under a bridge, they're the mini-min, the poorest of the poor. And so Rawls' maxi-min principle says you begin by, with every policy, moving the mini-min up to the maxi-min. And that is the maxi-min principle. You always start by helping the least well-off first. WOF, worst off first. Then after you help them, you can help these people. Then after you help those people, you help them, and all the way up. Now, the idea of the Affordable Care Act was that we were going to get health care for the poorest of the poor by taxing the richest of the rich. And the way that was supposed to be done is that if you didn't pay your taxes, you didn't have health insurance, you'd be fined. Well, billionaires don't need health insurance. I mean, a health insurance policy is only going to pay off $1 million if you have cancer. Very rarely does it pay for the most extreme needs. So if you're a billionaire, you make so much money, it makes absolutely no sense for you to buy health insurance. Trump has no health insurance, nor does Oprah. And the reason is they don't need it. It's a bad use of money. And they're more than willing to pay the fine, whatever that fine is. So as it turns out, these people didn't pay anything. These people, however, were afraid of paying that fine. So ultimately, the burden of paying for the poorest of the poor came from the midi-mid. And the ultra-rich and the rich didn't pay a dime. So the Affordable Health Care Act, as it turned out, became affordable for these people, and they didn't carry the burden. So it didn't actually work. But the notion was a good one. The idea is you're going to take money from the richest of the rich because that's the least bad, worst possible outcome. They don't get hurt if they spend money. It doesn't harm them in the least. But if they don't get money, it harms them tremendously. So this is John Rawls. And one of the things to think about is that if you are going into that voting booth, I want you to imagine you go into that voting booth and you're pregnant. And what is your biggest concern going to be? You have no idea how your baby is going to turn out. Are you worried that he's going to be healthy or she's going to be healthy? Or are you worried that he's going to be sick or unhealthy? Are you worried that you're going to have enough money to pay for that child's college or you're not going to have enough money to pay for that child's college? At that moment, you are truly behind the veil of ignorance. You do not have any idea of what that baby is going to look like when it's born. Will it have 10 toes and 10 fingers or not? You don't know. So when you vote in that voting booth, think about that. What would be the best possible outcome if everything goes wrong? How do you achieve for yourself the least bad, worst possible outcome? And the idea is to pay for the person, to vote for the person who would help you if things go badly, not the person who's going to help you if things go well. So that's John Rawls. Justice as fairness, not justice as equality. Justice then has got to be distinguished from equal rights. Equal rights are not just rights. And if you've ever heard of affirmative action, this is exactly what affirmative action was based on. Women and minorities who had been not had a fair chance were going to be given more rights than people who had had a fair chance. And the idea of justice is fairness. Instead of just giving everybody equal amounts, you give people the amount of rights and benefits based on their need. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you again soon.